Assalamu alaikum and g'day. My name is Yara Abu Hussein. I'm going to be your host for today on the ICB podcast. This is episode 1. So we're going to be discussing leadership and specifically one aspect of leadership, which is handing leadership down to the younger generation. Starting from my far right, I have Usaid Azim.
Assalamu alaikum everybody, how are you?
Yunus Shoaib.
Assalamu
Sameya.
Hi.
And Ali Kadri.
Assalamu alaikum.
So just to start off the conversation, I'll hand this off to Ali Kadri. What do you think about specifically handing down leadership to the younger generation?
Did you ask me because you think I'm getting older?
Just a little bit.
Okay, look, I think it's very important. I think as a young person, if I didn't have certain leaders who would have supported me and mentored me across my roles, different roles, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I think it's very important in my opinion. But it's not an easy thing to do, right? And perhaps that's something which we can talk as a second part of this podcast is what are some of the challenges for leaders and for young people when it comes to handing down the leadership. But I think most certainly it's very important to mentor young people into leadership and pass it on. So, whatever we've learned from our experiences and whatever mistakes we have made, you don't make the same mistakes because you learn from our experiences and you do new things. So, I think there's more continuation if you pass the leadership on and you mentor people.
On the topic of mistakes, this mic is not a mistake. We're just trying out the different mics to see how it goes. So in the feedback, just let us know in the comments below whether you guys like the wireless mics or you guys think the wired mics down here are better. But yeah, speaking on the topic of leadership, like Ali said, handing it down and whatnot, it's a very broad topic. But I think what we have to do is specificate it down because you have different leadership styles, you have different personalities of people and the way they do the whole leadership process. So I think that's a good thing that we can break down on, get specifics onto and, make sure it's all good.
Yeah, there's so many different types of leaders. We have the leaders that lead from the front, we have leaders that lead from the back, leaders that take a step back and, they let the followers do everything. But, when you have a variety of them as well, combine both of them, both those type of leaders, you get double leaders or something. They're like powerful leaders.
But don't you think on that point, the leaders have to lead in the front. It's how you lead. The virtue of being a leader is basically you set a strategic goal that's what we want to achieve, right? And this is what it will take to achieve. I'm willing to take all the risks. So basically, I do that with the staff here sometimes when somebody is reluctant to make decisions. I go and tell them, listen, I want you to make the decision. And if the decision is incorrect, I take the consequences. If decision is correct, you get the credit. Does that make sense? So it's kind of leading from the front, but also trusting people and building them up. You know what I mean?
My decision when leading from the back was I think I was reading an article with the Prophet. He was a shepherd. And a shepherd, what they do is they put the flock in front of them and they lead from the back. So that was his style of leadership.
I think, look, I'll disagree there. Why? I'll tell you why. In all the battles, Prophet participated.
Yep.
He was... In those days, the practice of Roman generals or Byzantine generals was that they will stand on a really good vantage point and they'll send their troops to war. Prophet didn't do that.
Yep.
Prophet was in the battle. Do you know what I mean? So he kind of led from the front. And I think that comparison, I don't think it's a true comparison when it comes to leadership. But what do you guys think?
I think what both of you are saying, obviously I'm not going to say they're wrong in a sense. But I think it plays a role in showing us of when a leader knows when to step up and step down.
Good point.
That's a very good point. And also, to move along with that, we do have Sameya here, as you guys know, and Yara. So these are our female captains for the ICB, vice captain over here, and the school captain, female captains. So on the topic of leadership, I think a good question that I'm sure the boys, Yunus and Kadri would agree with me, is that we're going to ask them how they actually perceive the role. What do they think that they've been given this leadership, they've been blessed with this position, and how are they going to take care of it and use it properly, how are they going to utilize it and whatnot.
Good. So leaders?
Yeah, I think, alhamdulillah, it's a great position to be blessed with. But we've just started, There's not much leadership going on apart from just speaking with the prefects and the...
But even with the events we've done so far, like World Hijab Day and stuff, I think we've run it pretty smoothly together as a team, whether you're female or male, we work together as one. So I think leadership is just a skill everyone has to obtain eventually.
But let me bring it back to our topic. So, you guys are captains at the moment, and obviously you know that your role as ICB school captains is going to come to an end in November. Okay. During that period of time, do you mentor your 11s and build them up? Or if they come up with ideas, how do you feel emotionally? Do you feel like, hang on a second, I'm a captain. I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to let you take the lead because it's my show.
Yeah.
Right? And, because there are leaders in the real world who are really skilled, very good in what they do. But as soon as they see somebody who they perceive as a competition, they try to pull them down.
It's an unconscious thing.
Yeah, because of ego or whatever reason.
Yeah.
And when they pull them down, what happens is that invariably when they lose their leadership and the new person comes up, they have no respect for the person who's left. And their legacy dies. Okay? Whereas, let's say, for example, you identify a leader up and coming and you support that person, mentor that person, doesn't mean you don't criticize them for the process of building them. And then that person invariably becomes a leader because everything comes to an end, right?
Yeah.
That person will remember and respect your legacy. So you will live longer in terms of leadership. So I'm really curious, as leaders, have you guys thought about it? Or how do you feel when somebody comes up with an idea and, you're a school captain, let's say, for example, and somebody comes up with a brilliant idea and it's a brilliant idea and you're a school captain. Have you ever thought about it? How do you feel?
Well, a lot of people have come up to me with ideas, and it's been really great to see what they say. But usually, what they ask me is, "You're school captain. Can you push this idea forward for me?" Just today, I've had a couple of girls come up to me specifically and say, "We have these ideas for formal, and we have these ideas for this and this and this. Can you push this forward in the next board meeting and the next thing?" And it's I'd like them to push their own ideas forward, but again, I don't know if they're going to be getting the same amount of respect and if their ideas are going to be brought forward as if I was to push them forward since I'm school captain.
Good point. So let's say, for example, somebody comes up to you with that idea and say, I want you to push this idea forward. Now you realize that person can, lead that idea and do that. Be your 11th person, let's say younger person, and then that person can really do a good job at it. Do you then give them, and it's going back to what Shoaib said, take a back step, okay, and let that person lead with that idea. In doing so, you're building another person. You're giving them an ability to build themselves. Or you say, no, it's your idea and you trust me to do it right. Okay, although I secretly know that maybe you and I can do same job, or perhaps you can do a better job than me. Do you then let them run with it, or do you take over and run with it yourself?
I think that we should move alongside together. So, for example, rather than them doing it completely or them putting the idea on us, we should know how to work together. That way, it can benefit both parties, and
so
then step forward.
Keep them in the loop, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have them involved in everything so they have the idea of what they have to do in future. As well as, you also, I don't know how to explain this in words, but, you also having, a stance there.
So you are there with them.
Yeah.
It's there was an analogy I used a few weeks ago with someone very senior in our school, and it was oh, look, we are rowing a boat, and sometimes, you come in and you start working with us or rowing our, paddles with us. And I was look, consider us as a ship, and we are all rowing towards a direction. I'm on the steering, and I'm steering it, but then I see you rowing in a different direction. Okay? So what I do is I row with you for a little while, so you get the hang of where we are heading towards, and then I go back to the steering. Does that make sense? Is it a good analogy?
You don't have to go one specific way. You don't have to completely take over the project or let them completely take over. There are sort of mid lines that you can take where both parties will benefit, like Sameya was saying. Yeah.
That's excellent. And one thing you mentioned, I think for the viewers, it's important to know. Board meeting, the reason is because we have this practice at ICB from this year, where our senior leaders, our school leaders, can participate in our management meeting every Thursday, and they come up with excellent ideas, and it's been good to have you guys there. But okay, that was a segue. But I think it's an important discussion. Now let's move on to: do you think that you see that in our community, or in wider sort of community, where leadership positions are sort of people prepare mentors. Have you got examples of it or lack of it in our community or outside? Have you seen it?
I'll be honest, in Brisbane, I've rarely seen people mentoring other people. You you go to mosques and everywhere, they're mainly made up of old people. They don't train the youth. And those are the people that will take forth of it in the upcoming generations. I think that's one part that they could improve on. Like mentoring, and as you said, building up the new leaders.
And when you say Brisbane, are you saying just Brisbane? Are you saying there are examples of it in outside Brisbane you have seen?
I've seen it in the community.
Where? The good examples.
Good examples? I've rarely seen.
So anywhere else you haven't seen this?
No.
Okay, so on that community leadership front, okay, let me tell you from my experience. So, every mosque has got a committee. Most mosques has got committees, and then they have trusts, okay? Now, obviously, people perceive a bit of a status symbol to be in those committees. They think that there's a status symbol if you're in a committee or if you're a trustee of a mosque or whatever it is. And most people are there for a good intention, right? But when they see a younger person coming in, wanting to take a position, and that younger person has a different perspective than that older person, then that older person automatically feels that, this is not a right person, I need to now subdue them because they will outshine me.
Do you think it's because of their ego or insecurity?
I think both. Yeah, ego is a symptom of insecurity.
Yeah.
So insecurity is a cause, and then ego is a symptom, and that is a challenging thing. Okay, it gets worse, unfortunately, when we see female leaders doing better than males, and they come up and then they'll use all sorts of ridiculous excuses that, women shouldn't be in the committee or women shouldn't be doing this. And that's just, in my understanding, it's a ruse, it's try to avoid that.
An example that I've just seen is that the New Zealand Prime Minister actually stepped down. But she was Jacinda. She was considered like an amazing Prime Minister. She was very good during her time, but then she just felt that she grew out of the role. So she stepped down. And I saw online comments, social media, all of them saying it's because she's a woman. She's finally, she's done with it.
No, I also saw that apparently she stepped down because she felt like she didn't have enough time with her kids. Because I think she just had a newborn baby or something. Yeah.
But look, I mean, that's probably a separate topic. I do agree that, leadership positions are taxing. Yeah. They burn you, especially if you do justice to it. Okay, it burns you, and that's why you see in a lot of leaders, successful leaders in history, have had very difficult personal lives. So if you look at whether you look at Martin Luther King, if you look at Malcolm X, if you look at Nelson Mandela, they've had issues because it's not easy to be a leader, whether you're male or female. Okay, and I think that's a whole different topic, whether females can take it better or males can, because realistically speaking, my understanding is that females are more patient. Okay, they can bear a lot more.
Yeah, I've seen both sides of the debate on this.
They both have their pros and cons.
So that's a different debate. But coming back to building people up, how do you think we should do it then? What should we do given these barriers?
Okay, I won't talk about how to do it, but I think going back to your point of maybe the elderly people in the community and subduing them and all that, I think that's where maybe, let's say, for example, a young person takes initiative and he asks one of them to mentor him. I think that I would imagine that'd work out way better, because you have that the elderly person, they're giving mentoring them while they're also bringing their own perspective. So it kind of oversees it. And I think overall that'd create a way better result than just having one side leading the whole front.
And I think on that, I can share a few stories with you. I think it's important. When I first started, right? So I was 30. Something, I'm forgetting how old I was when in 2010.
Let's go with 23.
I was in my late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And I kind of decided that I've done well in my career. I want to sort of give back to the community. So I joined a mosque committee, Holland Park Mosque Committee. And during that time, it was height of media on ISIS and everything else which was going on in Syria, and people were talking about terrorism and stuff. And a lot of times, Muslim community would complain that people who represent us don't really represent us on media, because media would go to anybody and they'll start saying some silly things and make us all look stupid. So I said, there are some really sane people in the community, and I put my hand up to do media. So 7:30 Report called me first to do a live interview. And for my first interview, it went well. It was okay. And I came back, and then I was like, you know what? I need to learn from someone. You know, I'm still young. I'm a migrant to this country. I understand politics of it, but you know, I wasn't born here. I haven't been here long enough. So I went to someone very senior in our community, and I said, would you mind mentoring me? Would you teach me? I really respect you. And that person said, you know, the best thing for you to do is stop doing what you're doing because you're not media trained. I said, what does that mean? He said, oh, we all did a weekend of media course. You haven't done it.
A weekend.
It's enough.
So I said, look, with all due respect, I think you failed to understand media, because the difference of perspective there was that the way media cycles work and why I believe I've been successful is because I understand how media actually works. So if a journalist calls you for a story and you tell him, sorry, I'm busy, call me tomorrow, he will never call you back because he has to do the story today. Okay? So what the journalist will do is that, okay, he will find somebody who will give him a comment.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of those people.
They always get to the bottom.
Yeah, so they'll find someone to make a comment. So they'll do it. So this person who's very experienced, very senior in our community said, no, we have to do it on our terms and we cannot be doing this. I said, look, I understand that. But if you don't speak, then they'll find somebody else to speak who's not going to speak as well as you do. So might as well you speak and you take some part of that narrative. Okay, so that was the discussion. Look, I believe that he failed us despite his great qualities and abilities. And he was almost trying to sabotage, stop me out completely, to call journalists and say, why are you interviewing him? Things like that. Yeah. And that lasted for a while. I also remember comments made that, oh, he's got an accent, so he shouldn't be speaking on behalf of Muslim community. Or he doesn't have a long enough beard, so he shouldn't be speaking on behalf of Muslim community. And this was a senior person, man. It was sad. Yeah. But I kept on. At the same time, then I met another leader in our community. I met 2-3 of them who kind of mentored me, who put me in the front. And if I made a mistake, they would have a conversation with me. And they come and say, listen, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it this way? And if I made some major mistakes, then they'll stand by me. Okay, that gave me the confidence to do what I need to do. Now, this is just my experience, and I've seen other people going through that experience, and through that experience, I've grown. Okay. I have also seen people in the mosque committees and trusts who would do that for their children, but wouldn't want to do it for anybody else's child, although that child would not have those skills. That they'll be like, oh, no, if it's not my child, then he's not getting the position. But this has been my experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you guys think?
Since the experience, I think it plays a lot back into the terms of like mentoring someone properly. You said before, like just subduing them and whatnot, and he was calling the journal articles and whatnot. That made me wonder, and I was thinking basically, do you think, like, I would assume politics would work a bit differently in different countries, right? So do you think that affects like how maybe like the elderly, whoever there is in the community, how they perceive the politics in the media in that sense?
I mean, in what terms? Explain your question again.
Like, okay, so we can establish that media would work differently, right? Media or politics would work differently in different countries. So my question is, how do you think that would change their perception? Like maybe in Australia, they have a perception of maybe, let's say, the uncles from India.
Very good example. So you're saying that they have an experience of media overseas, which is different to media here.
How would that affect?
Very good question. I think, look, media is media across the world, right? I mean, and that's a whole new topic, but I'll very quickly give you my understanding. There are journalists are human beings. Okay, every human being has got a bias. You got a left-leaning bias, you got a center bias, you got a right bias. Okay, and no matter how hard you try, you can never be 100% objective. Okay, in your reporting, if you're a journalist.
100%.
Okay. Now, some organizations are clearly left or clearly right. That exists anywhere in the world. So if you are a media spokesperson, you need to understand that. Let's talk names. So you've got News Corp, right? Courier Mail, the Australian, which is known as the conservative right-wing media organization. But do you think every single journalist who works there is a right-wing or a conservative?
That's the thing. Maybe not. They could literally just be doing their job. Like that's it.
Good question.
I haven't seen like a lot of some of like the really larger news companies. I've noticed that they're kind of more equal because they have so many journalists from different backgrounds, from different opinions as well. So I haven't noticed like a lot of I haven't noticed a lot of news people being like more objectively towards one side or objectively towards the other. Because fact is, if you go onto any news site and you search up something specific, you're going to find some article tailoring to that.
I understand, but I think, generally speaking, news organizations have a tinge, they go per certain way. But I think we're very off topic. Let's come back to the leadership. And I think coming back to it, again, look, News Corp, and I'll give you an example of News Corp, right? So News Corp's run by, or the president of News Corp is an Australian. His name is Rupert Murdoch. He's become a British American citizen, I think. He's got children, Lachlan and them. He's actually built Lachlan and brought him into that position. He's also mentored other people who are similar to him in his mindset, in a right-wing mindset. And he's brought them up. And they're very powerful. Because again, his leadership, although from our perspective it's been negative for the world, he's mentored other people, including his own child, to bring them up in positions, right? And that has kind of worked well. So coming back to the topic, I believe that mentorship of people who are like you and who can further your views and opinions overall is a very good thing.
Because wouldn't you say like it definitely, like, regardless of whether you admit it or not, it definitely affects the type of leader you become. Like for example, let's say Yara here, for example, she's been into school for a few years. Maybe she's seen how the previous female captains have run the school, and like maybe we don't know. Maybe that influences her way of captaincy, how she does it.
What do you think? Has it?
I haven't really noticed.
Really?
Most of the years I've been in like grade 9 just kind of focusing on myself, I think that the best kind of leader is the one where it's like you can't really like notice what they're doing, because the reason why the school is running smoothly is because they're being a good leader, So I think if you are in grade 8 and you're noticing that a leader if you're like noticing that a leader is even there, then I don't know how good of a
but where does that inspiration then comes from? How do you aspire to be the leader then if you can't? Because obviously, right now you're in a leadership position and you say school is running smooth, and that's why I didn't notice, right? But obviously, don't you think that if somebody's a leader, then you'd aspire to be like that person? You'd be like really admiring that person, want to follow that person.
A role model.
Role model that person. So don't you think that plays a role?
I think that people have different types of personalities, and if you are the person who's growing up and wanting to be a leader through every single step of your life, you will be noticing those people anyways and speaking to them. But the problem is that when I was younger and when I entered the school, I never imagined myself in this role at all. At all.
How did it come about then? Why did you put your hand up?
Well, it's just the past year maybe. It's just like something changed inside of me. I was thinking, I have all of these things in the school that I wanted to change, and I've always been thinking about them. So why not just step up and make that
Plus,
change?
you're like part of like so many other things as well. Like debating, for example, you like hosted that, didn't you? She led the inter-school debating competition. So I guess the qualities just ended up naturally coming to her.
So do you think then people placing you in those roles subconsciously made you a leader?
Definitely.
So that means somebody mentored you into it.
Definitely.
That means somebody aspired you into it.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
The
Whether you consciously look at it that way or not.
Going back to the point, regardless if you admit it or not, it does have like some effect.
And that means somebody was a good leader, whether it was a teacher or any other leader, I don't know who did it, but somebody putting you in that position actually aspired you to be a leader.
Sort of making you realize that you have those traits and you want to step forward.
Exactly.
So even when you like get selected for stuff, it makes you feel like, oh, you have like a role to play, or you're selected for something. You feel important, or like you're good enough for the role. So like it like kind of feeds into it.
I think talking about different roles and whatnot, I'm going to include my boy Yunus Shoaib here.
Okay.
So he's been given the role of Islamic captain, and my question to you, Yunus, is how do you take this role? What would you like to do with it? How would you like to move on further with it?
So obviously you're putting the Islamic front before anything else.
Yeah.
And then you're putting the leadership. So, wherever you go, whatever you're doing, you must know that you're Muslim first and then you're the leader.
Yeah.
You can't put it the leader and then the Muslim. There was the Sheikh Allah, he came, he said, there are two types of students, You have the Muslims and then you have the students. And then you have the students and then the Muslims.
Yeah.
And I think when when you're being an Islamic captain, you're obviously putting that Islamic perspective ahead.
Yeah.
Unlike maybe Yara, who's putting like a general perspective. But I think as well, it's important to have the general perspective as well as the Islamic perspective.
Yeah, they link nicely, yeah. Like she might think what's good for the school in general, like moving ahead maybe, and what's Islamic.
There should be a connection there.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I think, look, I mean, I guess position of leadership, any leadership, I think it's a blessing.
Yeah.
It's God-given. Okay, people don't become leaders unless Allah approves them to be leaders. And I'm talking about leaders who actually truly make a difference in anything, no matter how small or big. You know, I don't know if you know this, but in history, medieval times, the Christians believed that the king is the viceroy of the god. So king is the direct appointee of the god. In Anglican Church in particular, I don't know if you know, but the head of Anglican Church is a king of England or a queen of England.
Really?
Yeah, because they're the viceroy of the god. Like with Catholics, it's the Catholic Church. We also believe that Allah chooses people to lead.
Yeah.
So in any position where you're going to influence the society, you've been chosen by Allah. Right? Or by God. And that's where I guess, I think what we are doing here or trying to do is that by having a school captain and an Islamic captain is to sort of, organization, if you think about it, different roles of people, so, have somebody who can always come and purely think from Islamic perspective, but let the leader then make a decision.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So do the mashwara and have somebody with a very conservative Islamic focus or lens so you don't go too much towards the other side.
Yeah.
And that's working together. But I want to ask another curious question. If as leaders, you guys have a different opinion, right? So you're all leaders in your own right, an Islamic captain, a school captain, and let's say you come up with something and you want to do something really, really want to do it as a school captain, and Shoaib comes and puts spanners in the work, or vice versa.
Yeah.
How do you guys go about it?
Well, I think that it's important to have like a team sort of opinion on everything. Like, it's not like the school captain has supreme power over everyone else.
Yeah.
Disputes are like common between leaders anyways.
I think it's part of what also makes a good leadership team.
My question is, how do you handle it? What do you do with it?
I mean,
I think we just sit down and talk about it.
yeah, if you're unhappy
You've
with
got to work out the differences, especially, not every time things are going to work out your way. So you got to know that. And obviously you got to lean in towards the other person as well. You can't expect my way or the highway. So that's
At the end of the day, if the other person in the dispute has like the most like logical opinion, then they should be able to convince you, no matter how many like discussions that it takes. By the end of the day, like at some point, even if everybody's not on the same side, you need to realize that like everybody has some merit to their opinion. You need to see all the pros and cons.
So the Islamic style of leadership is that you do a mashwara, you have a discussion and then you let the Amir make a decision.
Yeah.
And if the Amir's decision is against everybody's mashwara, still Amir's decision is final and everybody follows it. Coming to that, this is my belief, that I believe that I take ultimate responsibility of anything which happens here as a CEO. Okay, so I've got leaders in different places. They make decisions, and I'm happy for them to make decisions. But if when they talk to me about it, and I have an opinion, I expect them to then execute the decision as I want it to be executed. Because ultimately, I will take the responsibility. Okay, because I'm in that position. So even if you don't respect me as a person, if you think you're smarter than me, if you think I'm wrong, but you have to surrender to that position, not because that position is higher or lower, it's just that position is of ultimate responsibility. So let's say, for example, coming back to this topic, you've got a school captain and, you come up with an idea, something you're discussing, and there's Islamic captains come in or any other, leaders come in and they've kind of overruled you, okay? And then you went with their decision. Something goes wrong, who's taking responsibility?
Me, yeah.
Okay, so don't you think that in that case, and Islamically too, it'd be right to have a leader make the final decision?
Yeah, I mean the example of the Amir, they make the final decision, they take the responsibility, but it's
It's difficult because it's kind of every single case point is different and needs to be perceived differently, you know?
I do understand, but I'm talking about the leadership, the final decision, the right to make a final decision is not because you're the smartest in the room sometimes. It's just because you have the most responsible position in that room. So something goes wrong, you take the final responsibility. And that's why you get that, right? So for example, you know, if you talk about the Sahaba, you know, if let's say they were planning a battle, and they'll be sitting all together. Now, of course, nobody would argue that Khalid bin Walid was a very good commander or general. Okay, he would give a mashwara of battle or a battle plan, and Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anha or Umar radiallahu anha would disagree with it, but it would be the Umar's decision which would be the final one. Although, arguably, you know, Khalid bin Walid is a very good general, and he's better at his craft. But Umar made a decision. So it's very important, I think, to understand as a leader and as followers of that leader or colleagues of that leader, that person's position has to be respected.
Yeah, I think that the point that you're making about like at some point the leader has to step in and make the decision is like absolutely true. At some point it has to happen. But alhamdulillah, what we've been trying to do is just start discussing our projects as soon as possible and as early as possible, so that if we do have disputes, we can have one meeting and then another meeting and another meeting, and then at some point in the meeting, the person who's able to explain themselves logically will be able to convince the other person anyways. At the end of the day, if it doesn't happen, the leader does
Make a final decision.
Yeah, get the final decision.
And I think that's very good and healthy way of leadership. Now, coming to outside the school, in political world, everywhere else, challenge you guys are going to face is that there are not many Muslims in influential positions outside the Muslim community. Very few. That means you'll have to take somebody else as a mentor who's not of your faith, not of your culture, because you know that network helps. Who knows who helps, right? Have you guys ever thought about it? And when you go out in the world and like how you're going to deal with it?
I mean, to a certain degree, yeah. For like, but let's say for example's sake, I've thought about maybe I was like I really like. I saw a businessman and I like his craft, like for example, and let's say someone else, not you, because we're going non-Muslim for this example, and like they're teaching me little tips and tricks, what to do, how to present yourself, leadership qualities, like owning a business, that type of stuff. There's always the question of like maybe for example dealing with interest, and you know something like that, it goes against the fold of Islam, and like you know you always have to think about it. You know sometimes take a step back, whether if like. Because obviously it's not something you can just use, so you have to think about your different procedure, your strategies, how you're going to go about this and whatnot. But
I think that getting a non-Muslim mentor definitely poses some issues, like Usaid has been talking about, where specifically they might be leading in a different way as well, and then there also might just be like an issue of respect, where like alhamdulillah a lot of non-Muslims do respect Islam, but then at some point, if like you're saying the issue of interest comes up and I'm speaking to my mentor and I tell them I can't deal with that, it's not in my religion, that's going to whittle down their respect because they're trying to teach me something. But I think that growing up in the Muslim community, you find a Muslim mentor anyways.
But then, you know, like for example, let's see right now in Queensland at least, we don't have a Muslim politician. Okay? So if somebody is aspiring to be a politician, and that's a leadership position, you need mentorship. You know, you need somebody to be able to mentor. You need somebody. It'd be great to have mentorship. It makes things faster. And you don't have that right now. Obviously, the pioneer has to go through a hard yaka to get there. And then, you know, while you're doing this, how do you do it? Because you don't have someone. So do you take them as mentor or you don't take them as mentors? Do you learn from them or you learn selectively from them, you know, which is good, and you reject what's not good for your religion?
I think that's a good point. You selectively take what you know is good, and then what obviously is against the fold of Islam you reject because that's your faith.
It's a good point. I was going to say, yeah, you're looking at the pros and cons. What pros you can take, you take. What cons you can't take, you can't take.
Because everybody has, good knowledge and obviously the bad knowledge. So you take the good knowledge.
But I think as a rule, as a principle, you take people as mentors regardless of their faith. And then you choose your style, or you pick and choose what works for you, what doesn't. On that note, I spoke to the treasurer of Australia at the moment, Jim Chalmers. He was working for Wayne Swan. Wayne was a treasurer when GFC happened. I don't know if you remember GFC. You don't know what that is? Okay, you're too young. Global financial crisis, 2008. The world almost collapsed.
Okay.
And when I say world collapse, means that we came this close from banks not giving people their money. Like really.
Like a Great Depression?
Worse. If it would have happened, it would be worse. So if you would have gone, put it this way. This is just a thought and maybe a future podcast. If you would have gone to the bank, right now you go to the bank, you put in an ATM card, and you get the money out. Imagine you go to the bank, you put an ATM card, and money doesn't come out. Bank says we don't have your money.
I'd be pretty pissed.
That actually happened in some countries. And that the world came so close to that in 2008, and that was GFC. Anyhow, coming back to our discussion, Wayne Swan was the treasurer of Australia at the time. He came up with some brilliant policies. That policies taught Jim Chalmers, who is now our treasurer. Okay, and he always remembers that because he learned and he admired. So that mentorship helped. So just our original topic of mentorship and how other leaders build leaders is a very good example because we're in kind of post-COVID. Not as bad scenario financially, but we are in a very interesting scenario, when it comes to global finances. And having Jim Chalmers, who was mentored by Wayne Swan, when he was a treasurer, and before, has actually helped him, to be a better treasurer. So the original discussion of learning from other leaders and how you go forward in life is another example there.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying about kind of the generational knowledge of like if you're mentored by another person, then you gain their knowledge and also the knowledge that you make, and then you can also pass that down to the lower generations. But then what happens, because if I'm in a position of leadership, I'd only want to take on one person to mentor at a time, right? If that person stops it, then what happens to all of that knowledge? I'd be ideally like not telling it to the whole world because I'd still want to maintain some kind of secrecy in what I do. So I'd be telling my the child that I'm mentoring that, and then they decide not to take a position of leadership or they decide not to pass on that knowledge. What happens to it,
I mean, look, that's why a lot of people write books, about their lives. And so post their life, people can read and learn from it. And people do. I mean, we still read books about, historical leaders and we learn from their examples. And we do that 1,400 years later, 2,000 years later. Marcus Aurelius, Roman, his writings are very important, when it comes to leadership and how he ran the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. Obviously, there's plenty of examples in Islamic history of leaders who've written books on how leadership has to be done. So I think that's one way of doing it. But finally, I think the last topic, we're running out of time. Last topic is as our community here in Brisbane, in Queensland. Okay, let's bring it back to home.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we? Because I would love to, in 10, 15 years' time, even earlier than that, I would love to sort of take a back seat and let somebody else do media or documentaries on behalf of the Muslim community, but be able to sort of tell them where I went wrong and I hope what I did differently, and let that person take leadership. And I'd love to do that, and partly it's possible for me. I don't have children, left marriage till late. I don't have kids. I don't have, and personally, I don't feel threatened at this point in my life. At some point in my life, I did. I'll be honest. I had my ego. I was like, hang on a second, this guy's doing better than me. I'm going to lose my position, but I don't anymore. Like I'm like, okay, it's not going to last forever, anyways. So why not pass this on to someone else? Let somebody else do it. And what do you guys think? Do you think we should force people who are in powerful position to think like this, or we should wait for them to pass on and then naturally it's going to come to you?
I don't think that it's just the fault of the people in the leadership positions. I also think that some people growing up, there's sort of this like cognitive bias where if you're self-taught, that means that you're better than somebody who was mentored in something. If there's a pianist and they're amazing, they're like a professional level, they say I'm self-taught, it becomes 100 times more impressive. So I think that there's kind of that thought as well well in leadership where younger people are not willing to step up and ask someone to mentor them because they think that if I can say that I worked on this myself and I thought of this myself, then it makes me appear more impressive instead of sort of appearing like I'm on the backseat of somebody else.
And then acknowledging somebody else.
Yeah.
And if you, that's actually a very good point. And if you don't do it, then that person will in their heart feel like, you know what, this is a bit, they're not giving me credit.
Yeah.
Should I just go and really...
And it puts the person who's self-taught in a more powerful position as well. Because they think they're better than, because they've learned it by themselves.
Yeah.
But it's an arrogant thing to do.
Yeah.
It's arrogance, right? So when you think that, you are here because of yourself, is a very arrogant thing to do. Even to think that you are here, I mean, of course, Allah chooses everything for everyone. But if you think that you are in any position of influence without support from other people, it is not true. It doesn't happen.
You get destroyed from that position.
Because you suddenly don't get support.
Like, even if we use you for example's sake, you are ICB CEO, but behind you, like even on the podcast you mentioned in one note, you have a whole team behind you.
Oh yeah.
And you always have behind the scenes work. Like even in our introductory episode, we have Zach behind the scenes helping with the editing and everything.
Exactly.
So we're like, you need like people behind the scenes, not just that, like people supporting you in general, giving you opinions, their input.
And everywhere. Look, I mean, Uncle Ishmael, I mentioned about him. He's the chairman of the ICB. Imam Usaid is a mentor to me. I go and talk to him quite often and take his opinion. I've got other brothers, friends. Robbie, a lot of times I was at a point in my life where I was feeling a bit sort of lost, and it was a funny incident. I called him up and I said, because I had a issue in a business, I had an issue in a personal life, and I wasn't down, but I was down. I was keeping a brave face, but I was down. And I called him one day and I said, mate, this is how much is left in my bank account, which was still a significant amount, but I was feeling bad, insecure about money. So I said, this is only how much I have left in my bank account. And he said, mate, do you know there are people who would die to be in your position right now? That's what Robbie said to me. I said, what you're telling me is a significant amount of money for majority of people. And look how you're thinking. Okay? And that was a mentorship. There was a friend telling me to think about something differently. Different perspective. Small thing, but kind of revives you.
Yeah.
Okay? And gets you back on your feet and gets you more confident. And having that around you all your life is a very good thing. And the same thing would happen now if he would call me and he's done that about certain things and he's like, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way. I'm like, hang on, have you looked at it from this perspective? It's very important to have that.
Very important, yeah. So also I wanna ask like you three, because you guys are in a role of leadership. What do you guys think of like Ali mentioned, thinking about it in a different perspective? Because we can obviously establish it's important, but what do you guys personally think about it? What do you perceive it as?
Aren't you a prefect as well, though?
Yeah, I'm a prefect, but I think I come to meetings, I give my input here and there, but ultimately, like we mentioned at the end, before on the podcast, eventually one of you guys will take a decision, and you do have to do the job at the end of the day. So because as you guys, like Ali said, have the most responsible position, or the more responsible position in this case, what do you guys think about it?
That's a really hard question now.
We gotta get into the deep topics.
Why don't Yara start? He's captain. I mean, I'm vice, so.
Oh, there you go.
If you want, I can re-say the question.
Just a little bit more elaboration. Think on what?
Okay, basically, what are you guys thinking about thinking from different perspectives as leaders?
I think that it's very important to keep everything in perspective because, like you were saying, what you thought was little money could have been a lot to somebody who was smaller than you. And then also, just when you're in a higher position, I think that keeping things in perspective is very, very important as a leader because it's like that in everything, not just money, as well as if you're in a high level, sort of everything seems smaller to you. So if I was a normal senator and I found out that I got 1 million votes, I'd be pretty happy, right? That's bad.
1 million votes in Queensland will be 4 senators. And the quota is 250. It's not a big...
If I was a senator, I found out that I got 100,000 votes, I'd be pretty happy. If I was prime minister and I found out that I got 6 million people on my side, I'd also be pretty happy, but they'd speak kind of like the same kind of thing to me. So I think that when you're a leader, it's so important to just sort of keep yourself around people that aren't leaders and speak to them normally so that you can get that kind of perspective. Like things like being included in the board meetings has been, not the board meetings, the senior management meetings has been like the norm for me now. I'm used to it. But then to somebody else, like we brought a prefect in and it was completely different to her and she like really enjoyed like speaking on her opinion and everything. So I think sort of being around those people and keeping things in perspective is very important.
Yeah, like the perspective thing, there's an ancient fable, the person, he had a bicycle and he thought he wanted a car until he saw a person walking and he said, oh, I'm thankful for, and the person walking, he wanted a bicycle. And then he saw a person with no legs, Yeah. So, going back to your story, your personal story, the money. It's important, I think, to look at different perspectives, especially as an Islamic captain. You look at an Islamic perspective, you also got to include the general perspective. You can't just reject what society is also looking at. And as a societal perspective as well, you can't just reject the Islamic perspective.
But on your most down moment in life, I'll tell you a story about a Chinese farmer. Okay. So a Chinese farmer and his son had one horse, and the horse ran away. So somebody came to them and they said, your horse ran away, it's really bad. And the farmer said, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay. A few days later, that horse came with 2 other horses. So people came to him and said, wow, you got 3 horses now. He said, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. And then his son was riding one of the horse and he fell off the horse and he broke his leg. So people came to him and said, oh, we're sorry, your son broke his leg and back. He said, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. And then, a few weeks later, the government came, there was a war, and every able-bodied young man was supposed to go on war. So his son didn't go to the war. And the people said, oh, wow, your son's got a broken leg, so he can't go to the war. He said, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it can keep on going on and on and on.
I thought that the bone breaking thing would be like it grew back way stronger and then it fell off.
But you know what I'm saying? Yeah. If you look at, and I heard this somewhere, and I think it's such a powerful thing. As a leader, you keep that in your mind all the time, because not every time is good, and good times not going to last. Yeah.
You don't know until...
And you don't know whatever is happening, is it happening for good or bad?
Yep.
It's a very Islamic way to do as well. Okay? So that's why, you never say faith's purpose is to help you live through life, not just to get you to Jannah. Yeah, it's very important. The purpose of our religion is to actually guide you through life. And our faith requires us to never be hopeless. So if you're a leader, and you made decisions and something went really horribly wrong, what do you do at that point? Do you think, oh man, life's so bad and this is so horrible and I don't want to be a leader anymore? Or do you say, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And I think that is what sums up the perspective thing. In leadership, it's very important to have that perspective in anything in life, but in leadership in particular, because I remember last year we did our formal in a yacht for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting. So we went to the yacht, and because we were doing it for the first time, and a lot of people not happy with it, and we still did it, and we were an hour late, to getting to the yacht because the timing got mixed up, but people were critical about it. But I don't know if being hour late was a good thing or a bad thing. Because if I started thinking, we were hour late and we missed out on the yacht, we would have missed out on the whole experience. We wouldn't have enjoyed it that much. Mm-hmm. But there are examples where you make a decision, something goes really wrong, you start thinking it's really bad, and you stop. I think life never stops. It stops when you close your eyes. It keeps going. Ups and downs happen. So in leadership, it's the same thing. You got to keep going. Okay, until, of course, you gave an example of Jacinda and she pulled back, and maybe that's the decision she wants to make. And if she's happy with that decision, she leaving that position, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just make a decision. And if you have that perspective in life, I think you live a much happier life than thinking that, I'm in a bad situation and why am I in this situation and feeling the self-pity. And I think good leaders do that naturally. They're capable of doing it. When you're under a horrific attack, you get criticized for whatever you just keep going. And eventually, now I've seen it myself. I've had people who'd say a horrible thing on WhatsApp about me, and a year later they want to take photo of me with their kids. And I know that the year before they were saying really bad things about me, but I don't know if them saying a bad thing about me was a good thing or a bad thing, or they wanting to take a photo with me is a good thing or a bad thing.
The most important question is, did you take the photo though?
Yeah, I did.
I mean, all leaders are risk takers, I guess, at some point. Like, as a leader, you have to be a risk taker. Whether it's you stepping back or you stepping forward, you still have to take that risk at the end of the day.
Cool. So I think, look, thank you. I think we've had a very good discussion on leadership. I have to tell you guys all that I'm so proud of our leaders, and I'm not just saying that because they're sitting here. I would say this without them being here too. I'm so proud of the students at ICB, and I'm so proud that we have such great leaders at ICB, and I would love to see them, all of them, the ones who are in front of the camera, the ones who are behind the camera, to take leadership in our community. And I'm confident that our community, inshallah, will be in better hands than it is now. And we'll move forward, and not just as Muslim community, but as Australians as well, with leaders like this.
All right, well, guys, this is the end of the discussion. To just a broadcast of leadership. It's a very good discussion. Alhamdulillah, we're going over a bunch of topics and whatnot. Also, a quick reminder to like, share, and subscribe. This podcast will be going up on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Facebook. So make sure to check it out, give us a look and whatnot. Also, let us know what topics you want to see, because we definitely have some interesting topics coming up. And
Okay, what are we talking about next?
Oh, what's going on here, man? So I think classic way we always end off again. We'll drink 3 sips. Halal, bismillah.